Welcome to this BYU education class titled Getting from Should Do to Want To. It will hopefully help you become very excited about writing your story and even have some ideas on how to keep it simple and make it fun and involve others. And that's the title of a 4-part class series. That this is one of them, as you can see here. And you might want to take note of some of the other classes, as they can also help you really improve on writing your own story. The second one listed talks about guides, prompts, tips, and tools for good storytelling. And that exactly does that. It helps you make the most out of the time that you spend trying to record your stories. And it will give you great insights in how to move forward. The third one listed, Making Family Stories Fun and Engaging for the Next Generation, will help you know how to transmit yours and your ancestors' stories to children and teenagers and others in meaningful ways that they'll be excited about receiving and have a lot of fun with it. And the fourth class listed there might be my favorite. It's called The Joys and Blessings of Writing with Others in Church, Family, and Writing Groups. And I'll tell you how you can do that and how you can set up your own writing groups and receive the joys and blessings that come from that. All right, let's get going with this class. I want to start out with this quote by President Kimball. He was the prophet when I was in my teens, and I remember well his often urging us to not go into eternity with having left our memoirs for our children, grandchildren, and posterity. He said this was a duty and a responsibility. I think it hit home very much to me because about this time, I was hearing my mom say that she wanted to record her life. She said, I should write a book and I'll call it Hell in High Heels. Now, she was a single mother raising 3 children on a secretary salary. And I think she identified very much with what later came out as the movie 9 to 5. And I knew my mother was fun. I knew she'd have a great story, and I so wanted her to write that book. But she never got it done. And I think just thinking about how much I wanted her to write her life story made me feel how important it is for all of us to write our stories. Well, I didn't write it. I didn't jump in on mine. I did try and keep journals a little bit here and there through the years, but I didn't really endeavor until 2012. And I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But one other thing that I should mention that prompted me through the years was this quote from Alex Haley. He was the one who wrote the series Roots, that was a TV series that you might remember. Every death is like the burning of a library. That is a powerful statement. And I felt it as I attended the funerals of many of my loved ones. It's so important for us to record our stories. All right, I think part of the reason why we're supposed to do that is for those who will read it, for others, for them. We want to make a connection between us and them, and we want them to feel part of the family and their heritage and who they came from. We also want them to feel more about who they are by knowing who their family is and what they've inherited, the legacies that have come with their name. We also want to pass on our testimony to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and some of the insights that we've gained as we've lived and moved on through life, and also the wisdom that's come through our experiences, and give them hope. I think that that's a very important one right now, as a lot of youth are struggling with hope and knowing that there is a bright future there and that they can make it through hard things. So that's one great all of these things are important to pass on. But what surprised me when I started to write my own story was that there was a plethora of blessings for me personally that I had not anticipated in any way. What I found out, and what I have found out in the ensuing years as I've helped many other people get started on writing their stories, is that these blessings come. We remember more and more about our lives. And isn't that one of the key words that we're taught to do in the scriptures, is remember? As we remember what's happened to us, we're able to see the Lord's hand in our lives. How he's been in the background, orchestrating and creating this wonderful tapestry that we call our lives. We also remember and see the Lord's hand through the people who've entered our life and how they've blessed us and shaped us and helped us. With this comes a huge sense of gratitude, an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the Lord and all those who have blessed us. And we also we feel again some of those deep emotions that we've had in the past, like when we felt the Holy Ghost bear witness to us of truths, or when we felt the love from a Heavenly Father as He's answered prayers or comforted us. I'd say that we feel almost 80% the degree of what we felt at the time as we remember these things and record them. They're a huge blessing. Another thing I've found particularly is I gain great insights into myself and why I do things or did things I might want to change, and how to improve my life. It also has given me great insights into other people, why they do what they do, and how I can be better off in interacting with them. With this comes a sense of forgiveness for ourselves, forgiving ourselves for the stupid things we did in our youth and at other times, and forgiving others, and with that comes a great sense of healing. As you review this list, you might be able to see why I often say or feel that I think 80% of why we're counseled to write our stories is for us. Yes, we want to pass on so much for the next generation, but there are so many blessings that come to us in doing so. All right, so why don't we do it more often? What's holding us back? I'm sure you've got your own list that comes to mind, but I want to identify them here quickly. Sometimes the task seems huge, especially if we think what we need to write something like this. This is Russell M. Nelson. It's a book on his life, President Nelson, written by Sherry Dew, called Insights from a Prophet's Life. And we're familiar with many of these biographies, autobiographies, but usually biographies. They're thick, and they seem like, how could I ever do that? That seems more than I could possibly do. Well, you might not have to. I'll show you some tricks in a minute. Even if you felt like you could take on that big of a task, that big of a book, when are you going to find the time? Time is a constraint that most of us have. And then we have all kinds of insecurities. You might feel like you don't know how to write or write well. I'm dyslexic. I can identify with that. I have a terrible time spelling. Thank heavens for spell check now. We also might wonder what to write, what to include, what to exclude, and can we even remember any parts of our life? All of those are barriers that keep us from wanting to, knowing we should do, but not necessarily having an excitement to do it. Well, in the next few minutes, I hope I can help you burst through that barrier and be really excited about the prospect of recording some of your life. Now, the first thing I want to show you is this. You might recognize it as a timeline that comes up on your ancestors from Family Search or Family Tree. And this is Charlotte Welch. She happens to be my great maternal grandmother. And if you've ever spent any time on these timelines, you realize that there's a whole story written right in between all of those events. For instance, we're able to find out how old she was when she married, where she lived at different times in her life, how many children she had, and how many children she lost, how old she was when her husband died, and so many other things without any details. Just right there. Matter of fact, Family Tree now, I think, actually creates a biography written up from these timelines, a little capsule on a person's story. Do you remember these books in Sunday school where we studied the teachings of the prophets? This example I have is of President Kimball. Do you remember what's in the very beginning of the book? It's a timeline. Right there is an example of President Kimball's life. It's not a really long timeline. It doesn't include everything. It just has some of the important elements of his timeline for this book. And in the paragraph above the timeline, there you'll see an explanation of what was included and what was omitted and why. As you read through this with just this annotated timeline, you get a rich feel for his life and what he dealt with and what he had to do. So the idea is you can make your own timeline. You could create a timeline with fun. For instance, you could take some wrapping paper, some old Christmas paper, wrapping paper, or something like this. And I just want to show, in case you haven't ever noticed, that often paper has grid lines on it, and that you can then cut it in long strips and make a timeline. You could have it to where you gave a timeline to everyone in your family. And for Family Home Evening, people could sit down and try to write their timeline. Or you could take, the paper rolls that come out of adding machines. Those would make great timelines too. Very convenient and small, and you could start writing your timeline on that. Or maybe you'd prefer doing it on 3x5 cards, which you could shuffle and move around because you can't remember exactly what happened when. And you could even use clothespins to hang them on a clothesline or something to that effect, or spread them across a ping pong table in order. There's all different ways in which you can make a timeline. Now here is a timeline example of what I made for my mother-in-law for her 85th birthday. Each of those lines represents 20 years of her life, and it builds from the bottom to the top. And what we did is we took pictures of her life at those different ages and we put them on the timeline. Then, as we gathered for her birthday celebration, we asked her questions about all of those questions, and we made little notes on her timeline for her. So this was just one fun way in which we did her timeline. So now I want you to create your own timeline, maybe in the notes that you're taking right now, or maybe you want to grab a spare piece of paper and make folds in it. This one I have folded into 4 pieces, so this would work easily for an 80-year-old. Each line would be for 10 years. You could have 40 years on the front and 40 years on the back. Maybe you just want to fold your paper in half or in thirds, but I challenge you right now to take a minute and get a piece of paper. And while you do that, I am going to get ready to play you some music, some background music. This is music from my son, so I like highlighting that he's the one playing the piano. But it's just less than 2 minutes. Just see all the memories that you can plop down in your timeline in that amount of time. I hope you enjoyed that for a few minutes and had a flood of memories come. If not, don't worry, I've got some other cues that will help you start to remember things more. But before we move on, I just want to come back to the book. You remember, we had the timeline in the beginning, and then afterwards, they had excerpts of a lot of his talks and his lessons that he'd given over the years. It was organized according to themes, and then they inserted different excerpts from that. Well, you could do something similar. You actually could record your life story without writing anything else. I'm sure you probably have A journal, maybe a mission journal. It might not be a complete journal. You might not have tons of volumes, but I bet you have something recorded. You might also have letters that you've saved or that someone saved that you wrote. You might have lessons that you've taught, classes you've taught, or talks you've given, or even papers that you've written in school, essays that might be worth sharing. And you might also have a scrapbook of pictures or different experiences recorded. I call all of these things your large plates. They're where you've recorded lots of things about your life, but most likely, most of your ancestors are not going to want to go through and wade through all of your large plates. So you want to create a small plates, and your timeline could be the beginning of that small plates. And then what you could do is take from the large plates little bits and pieces, maybe according to themes, or maybe according to your timeline, depending on how you want to organize it, and then just put it behind that timeline, and you have your life story recorded that way. So there's one idea. All right, now let's move on to another idea, and that is the difference between a life history and a memoir, and that you might want to actually write a memoir. A life history we usually think of as the full breadth of a life, from birth till death or there near about. We call it sometimes the chronological crawl, because sometimes it's slow, and it's intense, and it's long. A memoir gives you another alternative. It's much shorter, can be. Actually, here, let me show you the elements of a memoir. Usually, they contain about 5 to 10 major stories from your life. They begin with a bang. You start not with your birth, but in the middle of your story. And it centers around a theme, and you record your feelings, your reactions, and your reflections on things. Now, let me illustrate this a little bit better by a couple of examples. Let's see, where are my books? Here's one that you can find at Deseret Book. I just checked it out of the library. It's called Without the Mask. Now, to illustrate how you begin with a bang, let me start at the very beginning of his book. It says, "Lights blared. High above me was as I eagerly waited for my cue. The dance team took their place at the center of the end zone, and before I knew it, the heavy beat of the music pounded through the stadium speakers. Go time! I fixated my line of vision directly on the midfield marker at the front of the formation, then ran out onto the field. Once there, I turned toward the crowd and lifted my arms to dance. The sound was intense, instant, and deafening. It pierced right through the padding and fur that covered my ears. I couldn't see much through the mask, but I could feel the electric energy of the crowd. 60,000 people, all cheering for me. The intensity heightened my senses and pumped adrenaline through my veins. Any nervousness was immediately shaken off by my movements. Even with the considerable heat, weight, and restriction of the mascot suit, I brimmed with energy and confidence." So that's how he begins his story, and it ties into Without the Mask. If you're curious about more, I'll let you check it out on your own. I won't give the story away. Now, here's another example that you might not think of as a memoir, but I think it's memoir-ish. And this is The Heavens Are Open by Wendy Nelson. It's a compilation of experiences she's had with receiving revelation and answers to prayers. And so she's centered it around a theme and has included many experiences. Let me give you just one quick example. She says, "One late Friday afternoon on the first weekend in April, I headed out from my home in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, for a 2.5-hour drive to be with my widowed father in my hometown of Raymond, Alberta, for the weekend. We were looking forward to enjoying General Conference together. With all the busyness and intensity of end-of-semester demands on me as a university professor, I was looking forward to the spiritual renewal of conference and the joy of taking care of my dad. I was well prepared except for one thing. What was the one question I most needed to have answered? I had fleetingly thought about it for several weeks, but couldn't settle on anything. I didn't want to waste a general conference. Attending without a question in my heart and mind, general conference was one of my favorite times for personal revelation. I reviewed possible questions. I didn't need to seek revelation about whether to marry the wonderful man I'd been dating. I already had my answer, and the answer was no. I didn't need to seek help about my father, who had been dying, as he was now doing remarkably well. So what was my question? I might have surprised you when she said no about the man she was dating. No, that was not President Hinckley. So those are some ideas on how you can put together a memoir. It could be around an event in your life that kind of shaped your whole life and all that you learned from it, or it could be a compilation of teachings or principles or a value you want to teach, and then pull in your life story through that way. So there. Oh, I do want to point out one other thing, and that is, what about the Book of Mormon? Is it a life history or a memoir? Especially Nephi's writing. Let's take a look. These are all of the stories, at least how I would categorize them, that Nephi writes about in his 2 books of Nephi. I would say that that's about 5 to 10 stories. And then he weaves in between those stories all the other things that he wants us to know. Then, so we've got the 5 to 10 major stories. He begins with a bang. I would say Lehi having to flee for his life after having seen visions is a big bang. He doesn't start at the beginning, at his birth. Then he centers around a theme, and that the theme is about the Savior and wanting to bring his family to the Savior, and repentance and remembering. And it's all gospel-centered. He definitely records feelings, reactions, and reflections in what he writes. And what I want to point out more than anything else is that, at least in this blue copy of the Book of Mormon, all of his writings are 117 pages. Now, if you take out the about 60 pages of Jacob's writing and Isaiah that he's included, you're left with about 60 pages. And those 60 pages, remember, are a half to a third often filled with footnotes. And think of all that Nephi gave us in those short pages. You don't have to write everything to have left something very meaningful for your posterity. All right, now I want to share a couple of other things with you. I have a writing group that I cherish. They're some of my dearest friends, or have become my dearest friends as we've written and shared our lives with each other. Well, in one of my other classes, actually, a little bit in all of my classes, I share some of their stories with you. Now to move on, I want to share with you some titles of some memoirs that I have made up. They're from people in my writing group. I was thinking about them and all that they had shared with me, and I decided if I were to be their publisher and put together everything that they had read in our writing group so far, what would I title it and what would I put together? So here's some possible titles I would put for them. This is Jane, and I would title hers, I'd Rather Laugh. Jane has a remarkable sense of humor, and she has experienced some very trying times in her life, but she has learned how to laugh through all of them. This is Lara, and she ends up often writing about her childhood, and she says she can't ever remember exactly how old she is, so she'll put in the line, well, I was about 9, so that's what I would title her book, When I Was About 9. Flory loves food and family, and they often come together in her stories and show up in meaningful ways. I think it would be marvelous for Flory to write a memoir on just her family recipes and the stories behind them. And so I would title her book, My Life's Recipes. And here's one for Janice. Now, Janice doesn't forget like the most of us. She remembers the name of her dentist when she was 10 years old, and everybody else that has entered her life and blessed her. And that's the main thing that I've taken away from Janice. Not only does she remember the people, but she remembers all the kindness that they have done for her. I think it would be kind of fun to do one more experiment with Janice and helping you remember other than just the timeline that you did. This is something Janice wrote in response to the prompt, an unforgettable smell. As Janice reads her story to us about what she remembers of a smell, notice if it spurs any memories of smells for you.
I had my first encounter with this most delectably fragrant lotion when Aunt Bonnie was bathing baby Reed. After his bath, she would rub him down with baby magic and then don the diaper, rubber pants, shorts, and t-shirt. After his spa treatment, Reed smelled delicious, and I found myself drawn to that amazing aroma. Later on, I found Aunt Bonnie using that same lotion herself. I was surprised because my 6-year-old brain thought that baby items were exclusively for babies, and I innocently questioned her about it. She explained to me very matter-of-factly that anyone could use the lotion. Following that vacation, I would occasionally come across that wonderful odor and relive the fun time I had had at Aunt Bonnie's. I would also remember how much I loved that luscious-smelling lotion, which I came to find out was called Baby Magic.
Smells aren't the only thing that prompt us memories. Maybe you have music that you love. If you put on music from your youth, you will have a flood of memories come back. Tastes also bring back lots of memories. There's one thing that I can give you as a great prompt to help you know what to record in your life story. These are what I called the golden prompts, what everyone wants to know about you. They want to know who you are, your personality, what makes you go. The timeline is great for letting us know about you and what you did in your life, but your personality doesn't come through in that. I have found that almost anything you write, though, will show your personality, so you don't have to really struggle to do that. Your humor, your values, how you see the world will just seep into what you write. So that one's easily pretty much covered as long as you write something. They also want to know your love story. How did you meet your spouse? How did the proposal go? What were the hiccups along the way? What advice do you have to share with others? Now, maybe you haven't been lucky in love, so to speak. Maybe that love story hasn't transpired yet. Your family wants to know, how did you deal with that? How did you learn? How did you grow? How did you move forward? Or if your love story turned sour, they also want to know about that, how you dealt with that, and how they can learn from your experiences. Another prompt is your conversion and your redemption. Now, by this I mean how you came to know that God lives and hears and answers prayers. How do you know that He knows who you are personally? How did you gain a testimony of tithing, or of priesthood blessings, or of any other number of gospel principles and practices? Along with that comes the idea of redemption. How have your experiences changed you and helped you grow and move forward? I've often read that the best stories, the most selling stories in movies or books are redemptive stories, where the main character is able to grow and move forward and on. So remember to include that. And last, which is part of this, is the lessons you've learned, and particularly sometimes the hard times you've gone through. Now, those hard times sometimes aren't the easiest things to record, nor the things that we want to jump in and record first. Now, I told you a little bit ago that I wanted my mother to write her book, Hell in High Heels. She never got that done, but she did write this. It's small. It's only, I would say, maybe 10 pages. And it was written after my brother begged her to write her spiritual story. So you could call this her golden plates, her golden nuggets, and it answers all of these prompts in just 10 pages. So you don't have to write a huge book to compile your story. This is my story. Now, let me go back to when I told you it was 2012 when I finally got around to writing my story. For many years, I had thought about doing it. Actually, in graduate school, I had a professor who took us through a meditative exercise where he had us close our eyes and envision ourselves in one of our most favorite places. Mine was in a mountain meadow. And while sitting in our imaginary favorite place, he said that we had to envision this, that we had gone there to think deeply about something and to figure out the answers to a big question. You see, we had recently been told that we only had 2 years to live. We had already sought second opinions, and we were sure that this diagnosis was correct. And we knew that we would be able to live our lives pretty normally up until the last couple of months. So we were now sitting in this favorite place to figure out what it was we wanted to do with that last 2 years of our life. He gave us about 5 minutes to contemplate on this, and it's a meditative exercise I highly recommend that you try sometimes, because when you do it, what's really important in your life percolates up to the top. It was so meaningful to me that I began the practice of doing it every end of the year, sitting in the living room when no one else is around with just the Christmas tree lights on. I go through this meditative exercise, and for years, part of what came up to my mind of what I should do was write my life story. And I knew it, but I never acted on it until 2012. And what happened in 2012 is the book club that I'm a member of, we reviewed one of the members' sister-in-law's memoir. Okay, did you get that? One of the ladies that attends my book club, her sister had written her memoir, and she got copies of it. It was self-published, and she passed it around to us, and we all read it. And I was thrilled by this book. I thought it was a fantastic read. I learned so much by reading it. But the thing that I kept feeling is that we should be writing this, not just reading it. We should be writing and sharing our own. And in book club, I made that comment over and over again, and I convinced a couple of them, and we started our first writing group. And that's how I came to write my story, or begin it. It was because of those ladies that joined me in that writing group. Now, the other reason why I was able to accomplish something is I made a deadline. And that is that I wanted to give something for Christmas. This memoir, whatever I had started on, I wanted to give it to my children for Christmas. Several years before then, we had started a family tradition of trying to give really meaningful personal gifts to each other. So this fit the bill, and I wanted to do it. Now, I'll show you that it's nothing spectacular. And I said in the beginning, right here on the front page, I said, "Note, this is certainly not a final draft. Please help me turn it into something grandchildren and future generations will enjoy reading and benefit from. I'm eager to hear any and all of your ideas on how it can be improved." So I actually asked them to write on it and pass it back to me so I could improve it. So that's just a way of showing you, again, it doesn't have to be a big hardbound book. You can start this way. You can actually get feedback from family and friends on how to improve it and make it better. That was such a huge success. Like I said, 80% of the benefit I got from it, but there were more blessings than that. I gave it to my children in December. My daughter just then moved back to the state of Utah. And in February, I felt impressed to travel to St. George to spend time with my mother and stepfather. I told my daughter my plans, and she immediately piped in and said, "Oh, Mom, can I join you?" And that surprised me. I had no idea she would even want to do that. She and my mother had not been really close, mainly because of geographical constraints over the years. We hadn't lived close to each other. And so when she got in the car and was driving down with me, I said, "What prompted you to want to come with me? I mean, that's a long time to be gone from your husband." And she said, "Mom, it was your story. It was your life story. I came to deeply love Grandma Dorothy from what you'd written." I was totally surprised. I had had no intention of writing my mother's story. I was just writing my own. But I learned that as you write your stories, you can't help but write those of your parents. So what I want to pass on is it can connect you to generations together. But if you're worried about writing your parents' story, just write your own. you can't help but record theirs in yours, and that lightens your burden as well. Now, maybe words are not your thing. Maybe you're more of a scrapbooker. There's another way in which you can record your story, and I'll go a little further with my story to explain that. I was swimming laps the summer after I gave my daughter that book. Not that book, but that red folder. And I thought, okay, I don't want to think about what I'm doing. I'm going to think about every year of my married life and try to think about all the memories that happened during that while I swim one lap and then a second lap and so forth. And I realized they were all messed up and there were tons of things I couldn't remember. And then I decided, okay, I need to put together a timeline of my married life. No, I want to put together a photo timeline of my married life so I can remember that. So that became my Christmas present the following year. And here is a book of it. And you can see it here. And you can do this on Shutterfly. And inside, I picked not my favorite pictures of all times, but the pictures that told the story of our family, and I inserted some writings on it. I didn't do as much writing as I could have on the first book, and I'll show you how I improved the second. But you can see there very quickly is the story of our lives. Just a couple of pages. So then, the following year, I did the next 10 years. And on the back of that one, I put the children's pictures when they were in kindergarten and when they were baptized, because their children then could identify with those pictures and it helped them. And the following year I gave the next 10 years. And I still have another book to get done, but I found that doing them from digital pictures is actually harder than doing them from scanned pictures that you've got in old photo books. But anyway, there's another way you can do it. Let me finish by going back to where I started, and that is with this quote from President Kimball when he urged us to not go into eternity without having left our memoirs for our children, grandchildren, and posterity. And he said, this is a duty and a responsibility. I hope by now, instead of feeling it's something you should do, I hope you've got a lot of enthusiasm and you feel like it's something you want to do, to make timelines, or to collect from your large plates, or to sit down and just start writing stories from your life and eventually discovering what the central theme is and how you can put it together as a memoir. Or maybe just writing your spiritual small plates, or possibly putting together a photo book. I wish you the best in all your efforts.